Fans have spent 35 years calling Lisa Simpson the smartest kid on television, the saxophone, the Mensa card, the future presidency, but one decision locked her genius in place for the rest of the show's run, and a Beatle made it, with lawyers in the room. This is Every Time Lisa Simpson Was a Genius. The character, Matt Groening, drew in a lobby. There is a version of television history in which Lisa Simpson never existed, in which the whole family never existed, in which the show that would go on to run for more than 3 decades, win dozens of Emmy Awards, and shape how an entire generation understood comedy, satire, and the American household simply never happened. That version of history was very nearly real, and the reason it did not come to pass has everything to do with a man sitting in a waiting room, staring at a blank piece of paper, making a very fast decision. Matt Groening was not supposed to be creating a new animated family on the morning he sketched The Simpsons into existence. He had been invited to meet with producer James L. Brooks in the lobby of Brooks' office in Los Angeles sometime in 1987. Brooks was an established figure in television and film by that point, having built an impressive reputation through productions including The Mary Tyler Moore Show and the film Broadcast News. He had been introduced to Groening's work through a comic strip called Life in Hell, a self-published underground series that Groening had been drawing since 1977. Life in Hell featured a cast of anthropomorphic rabbits navigating existential dread, failed relationships, and the grinding misery of modern life. It was funny in a dark, specific way that caught the attention of people in the industry. Brooks wanted to adapt the strip into animated shorts for a new Fox variety show called The Tracy Ullman Show. Groening had every reason to say yes. The offer was a real opportunity in a city where real opportunities were hard to come by. He had spent years drawing the strip by himself, distributing it, and building a readership through alternative newspapers. The idea of bringing those characters to a television audience was appealing. The problem was the contract. To animate Life in Hell for Fox, Groening would have had to sign over his publishing rights. The strip was his life's work. He had built it from nothing, handing control of it to a television network, especially a brand new one that most people expected to fold within a few months, felt like too great a risk. He sat in the lobby and thought about what else he could offer. What he did in that waiting room, according to the most widely reported version of the story, was sketch out an entirely new family. A dysfunctional, lower middle-class American household with a father, a mother, 3 children, and a baby. He named them after members of his own family. Homer was named after his father, Homer Groening. Marge shared a name with his mother, Margaret. The baby girl he called Maggie. The older boy he named Bart, an anagram of the word brat, loosely modeled on Groening's older brother Mark. And the middle daughter, the girl with the unusual hair and the sharp eyes, he named Lisa. She was named after his younger sister, Lisa Groening Bartlett. She was not based on her personality or character. The name was simply there, belonging to someone in the family, and so it went onto the paper. In the span of a few minutes, Groening had created the most recognizable animated family in the history of American television. The designs themselves were rough. Groening submitted basic sketches to the animators at Klasky Csupo, the studio brought in to produce the shorts. He assumed they would clean the drawings up, smooth out the lines, and refine the look before putting the characters on screen. They did not do this. They simply traced over what Groening had drawn. The result was a family that looked crudely angular and slightly rubbery, with large heads and tiny eyes, and a visual style unlike anything else on television at the time. The choice to make the characters yellow is one that has been debated and discussed ever since. The original reasoning was that yellow skin would pop on a television screen and make the characters instantly recognizable even when viewed from across a room. Whether or not that logic fully holds up, the yellow stayed, and it became one of the most distinctive visual signatures in the medium. Lisa's design was particularly unusual. Groening, who was drawing primarily in black and white at the time he created the family, gave both Lisa and her baby sister Maggie the same spiky hair. He described his thinking as simply not wanting to deal with the question of what a cartoon girl's hairstyle should look like. The result was a crown of radiating points that some people described as a starfish. Most of the show's animators came to use a drawing method they called the 3-3-2 arrangement, a system of points and curves that allowed them to reproduce Lisa's head consistently across thousands of frames of animation. Despite having a formula, many of the show's most experienced animators still considered Lisa the hardest character in the family to draw. The abstractness of her silhouette, the geometry of her hair against the roundness of her face, required a level of precision that other characters did not. The first short featuring the Simpson family aired on April 19, 1987, as part of The Tracy Ullman Show. It was called Good Night, and it showed Homer putting the children to bed and Marge worrying aloud about bed bugs in a way that terrified terrified the younger kids. It was short, strange, and oddly charming. Lisa was there, small and round-eyed, watching the ceiling with the same alarmed expression she would spend years perfecting. Over the next 3 seasons, 48 shorts in total would air on the Tracey Ullman program, filling the gaps between sketches and commercial breaks. Audience research at the time found that only 14% of Americans were aware the shorts existed. Within a year of the full series launching, that number would climb to 85%. But in 1987, The Family was still a novelty, a set of crudely drawn shapes filling time between comedy sketches for a network most people expected to disappear. In those early shorts, Lisa had almost no distinct personality. This is something the show's later writers and producers have acknowledged openly. She was, in the words of Al Jean, who would go on to become one of the show's longest-serving showrunners, something like a female Bart. Both children were mischievous. Both were loud and wild and prone to getting into trouble. Lisa did not yet have the intelligence, the sadness, or the moral weight that would eventually define her. She was a presence, a member of the family, but not yet a character with her own interior life. The shorts did not have space or time for that. They were roughly 60 seconds long, built around single gags, and they needed to establish the family's dynamic quickly. In that format, Lisa existed mostly as part of a set. The voice behind her, however, was already in place. Yeardley Smith was 22 years old when she came in to audition for the Tracey Ullman Show shorts. She had been born in Paris, where her father was a news correspondent for United Press International, and had grown up in Washington, D.C. She had started her career in theater at a young age, eventually moving to New York and appearing in a Broadway production of Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing. She made her way to Los Angeles and had taken some film roles, including an appearance in the 1986 Stephen King film Maximum Overdrive. Before the audition came along, she came in intending to try for the role of Bart. She described the idea of playing a bratty 10-year-old boy as more appealing than playing what she thought of as the boring middle child. The casting director listened to 2 lines and thanked her for coming. Her voice was considered too high for a boy. She was offered the role of Lisa instead. Nancy Cartwright, who would eventually become the voice of Bart, had originally auditioned for Lisa. The swap was accidental, born out of instinct rather than planning. Cartwright was told her voice was better suited for the brother, and she went with it. Smith was pointed toward the sister, and she went with it too. For her part, Smith has said she initially viewed the role as a side project that would run alongside her on-camera career, which she expected to remain her main focus. She told herself that as long as the voice work did not interfere with the rest of her career, it would be fine. Voice acting, she said in later interviews, carried a stigma in the industry. It was sometimes treated as lesser work, something separate from real acting. She was not sure how seriously to take it. She took the role. When the full half-hour series launched on December 17, 1989, with the Christmas special Simpsons roasting on an open fire, something had shifted in the way the show understood its characters. The shorts had allowed the family to exist and to be funny. The longer format created room for them to be people. Lisa, in particular, started to change. Al Jean recalled that as the writers began developing the series, Lisa moved away from the Hellraiser version of herself from the shorts and towards something sadder and more thoughtful. She became the intellectual of the family. She became the one who worried about things that no one else in her household or her school or her town seemed to notice or care about. Her intelligence was not presented as a superpower. It was presented as a condition, something she carried around that set her apart from the people she was supposed to belong with. The first episode of the full series to really put that intelligence on display was not a Lisa-centric episode at all. In Krusty Gets Busted, a first-season episode, it is Lisa who figures out that Sideshow Bob has framed Krusty the Clown for armed robbery. She lays out the evidence, reasons through the logic, and solves the mystery while the adults around her remain baffled. The episode was driven by Bart, but Lisa's contribution to the resolution was unmistakable. Her mind worked differently from everyone else's in Springfield, and the show had found a way to use that. The IQ number that would eventually be attached to the character, 159, placed her in the top fraction of a percent of all measured intelligence. The show would later make her a member of the Springfield chapter of Mensa, the international organization for people who score in the top 2% of any standardized intelligence test. She would be described as someone who reads advanced scientific journals for fun, who subscribes to publications well well beyond what any child her age would be expected to engage with, who argues with adults using frameworks they did not expect from an 8-year-old. But in those earliest episodes, none of that scaffolding was in place yet. The genius was there in the writing, present in the way she reasoned and observed, without yet being formally declared. The character was being built from the inside out. Yeardley Smith won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Voiceover Performance in 1992. It was the first year that voice actors had been nominated in that category, which made her the first performer in the show's history to win one for playing Lisa. According to Smith's own account, she did not feel that the award counted. The Emmy for voice acting was a Creative Arts Award, presented separately from the main primetime telecast, and Smith did not initially treat it with the same weight she would have given a prize handed out on the main stage. She put the award in a closet. She left it there for 9 years. She later described this as a mistake, a version of the same dismissiveness toward voice work that had made her uncertain about the role in the first place. The Emmy stayed in the closet while the show continued to grow into something enormous. Matt Groening, for his part, has described Smith as deeply similar to the character she voices. His observation was that Smith holds strong moral views about what Lisa should and should not do, which meant that the actress and the character were, in some essential way, aligned. Smith herself has said that playing Lisa brought out the best version of herself over the years. The two of them, the woman and the cartoon she gave a voice to, grew up alongside each other through the same 3.5 decades of television. Lisa became vegetarian. Lisa became Buddhist. Lisa became an environmentalist, a feminist, a jazz musician, a reluctant hero, a lonely genius in a family of cheerful chaos. Smith kept showing up to the recording booth and finding new ways to make the character's sadness land with precision. None of that was visible in the waiting room sketch. In the rough drawing Groening made of the family, Lisa was simply a middle child with spiky hair. She was a placeholder, a name borrowed from a sibling, a figure in a family portrait drawn in a few minutes on a piece of paper to keep a comic strip safe. The version of Lisa that existed on the day she was invented had almost nothing in common with the version of Lisa that the show would eventually build. The building took years. It took writers who wanted to try something emotional in a show full of jokes. It took a voice actress who came in for the wrong role and stayed for 35 years. It took a producer who asked, one morning, whether a story about a little girl being sad, without knowing why, could make good television. What came out of all of that, slowly and then all at once, was The Smartest Kid in Springfield, and the story of how she stayed that way and what it cost her is where everything that follows begins. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Lisa Simpson was created in a matter of minutes by a man trying to protect a comic strip about rabbits. In the first 2 years of her existence, she had almost no distinct personality at all. Next section takes the first moment anyone on the show asked what was really going on inside her head, and what happened the night she slipped out of her house alone and followed the sound of a saxophone through Springfield. Section 2, the night she followed the music. Al Jean and Mike Reiss did not want the assignment. They were writers on a new animated comedy, and the show, 6 episodes into its first season, had been doing something they found exciting and difficult in equal measure. It was learning how to be funny in a particular way, precise and fast, building jokes through the specific rhythms of a family that was beginning to develop real texture. Jean and Reiss were good at that kind of work. They were young and sharp, and they understood the mechanics of the show's humor. What they were handed instead, in the early weeks of 1990, was a pitch from producer James L. Brooks that described something almost entirely different. Brooks had an idea for an episode. He wanted to write a story in which Lisa Simpson was sad. Not sad because something had gone wrong, not sad because Bart had broken something or Homer had made a mistake. Just sad. Sad in the way that children sometimes are without being able to explain it to anyone, including themselves. He had been trying to get an episode like this made since his earlier work in television, going back to the days of the sitcom Taxi. He believed the show could carry that kind of emotional weight. He believed, specifically, that an 8-year-old cartoon girl could be the vehicle for it. Jean and Reiss were not so sure. They accepted the assignment with significant reservations. Groening, by multiple accounts, found the situation amusing and made sure to let them know it. What eventually aired on February 11, 1990, was the 6th episode of the first season. It was called Moaning Lisa, written by Al Jean and Mike Reiss, and directed by Wes Archer. It was the first episode of the series to center entirely on Lisa Simpson, and what it did to her character, in the space of roughly 22 minutes, established almost everything that the show would spend the next 3 decades building on top of. The episode begins with Lisa having what the script describes as an unnamed sadness. She wakes up miserable and does not know why. She goes to school miserable. Her music teacher, a man named Mr. Largo who would become a recurring presence in the show, tells her to stop improvising during band practice and play only the notes on the page. The instruction is delivered without cruelty, but also without curiosity. Mr. Largo is not interested in why Lisa is playing differently from what is written. He is interested in the class playing together, uniformly, within the lines the sheet music has drawn. Lisa's instinct to deviate, to express something true through the instrument rather than something correct, is treated as a discipline problem rather than a gift. She sits through gym class refusing to participate. She comes home and stares at the ceiling. Her parents, Homer and Marge, try various approaches to cheer her up, and none of them work because none of them address the actual problem, which is that Lisa understands something about the weight of the world that most people in Springfield are not equipped to feel. She is too young to articulate this, and too honest to pretend it is not there. What she can do is play the saxophone. In her room that night, she picks up the instrument and begins to play something slow and aching, the sound of feeling things that have no names. She is told to stop. The family is trying to sleep. She puts the instrument down. Then, through her window, she hears something. A saxophone is playing somewhere outside, in the dark, and it sounds like what she has been trying to say. She follows the music through the streets of Springfield at night, alone, and finds a man sitting on a bridge overpass, playing the blues. His name, he tells her, is Oscar Bleeding Gums Murphy. He is a jazz musician with an enormous talent and almost no audience. He plays because he has no choice. He explains the blues to her, not as a genre with rules and conventions, but as a method of taking whatever is hurting you and putting it into sound. He tells her that sadness does not have to be something to fight off or suppress. It can be expressed. He plays, she plays alongside him, and something in Lisa settles, not because the sadness is gone, but because she has found a way to hold it. Ron Taylor, the actor who voiced Bleeding Gums Murphy in this episode and would return to the role in later seasons, brought a warmth and gravity to the character that made the relationship between him and Lisa feel real rather than symbolic. The saxophone solos in the episode were performed by Dan Higgins, a session musician whose playing would appear throughout the show's saxophone-related moments across many seasons. The combination of Taylor's voice and Higgins's playing gave Murphy a presence on screen that was larger than his limited screen time would have suggested. He felt like someone who had lived a full life before this scene and who would continue living one after it. The character of Bleeding Gums Murphy was drawn, in part, from the tradition of early American blues musicians, figures who had turned personal suffering into a musical form that outlasted them. The writers also took specific visual inspiration from Sonny Rollins, the great saxophonist known for a period in the late 1950s when he withdrew from public performance to practice alone on the Williamsburg Bridge in New York, playing through the night above the traffic and the water. The image of a man playing saxophone on a bridge, for himself and for whoever happened to pass, has a specific resonance in jazz history. The writers placed Murphy in that image deliberately. When Lisa follows the sound to the bridge and finds him there, she is walking into something larger than a cartoon scene. The show was drawing a line between her articulate sadness and a musical tradition built on the same impulse. Lisa, at 8 years old, in a cartoon about a dysfunctional family in a fictional American town, was being placed inside a lineage. While all of this was happening with Lisa, Homer and Bart were in the basement playing a video boxing game called Super Slugfest. Homer could not beat Bart. He spent the entire episode trying, enlisting help, practicing, and still losing. The subplot was played entirely for comedy, and it worked precisely because of how different it was in tone from everything happening upstairs. The show had figured out that it could hold two completely different registers at the same time, the broad and the tender, and that having them coexist did not undermine either one. The comedy of Homer's video game humiliation made the sincerity of Lisa's night on the bridge feel more earned, not less. The episode demonstrated something that the best Simpsons episodes would keep demonstrating for the next decade, that the family's collective absurdity and the emotional truth of any one of its members are not in competition. They exist on the same canvas, and the contrast between them is what gives each its proper weight. Back in the story, Marge finds Lisa on the bridge with Murphy and brings her home. The next morning, Marge gives her daughter advice that the episode initially presents as loving and then reveals to be misguided. She tells Lisa to smile. She tells her that if she presents happiness on the outside, the feelings inside will eventually follow. She tells her that suppressing her true emotions is the practical thing to do, that the world responds better to cheerfulness than to sadness, and that a girl like Lisa will get further in life if she does not alarm people with the depth of what she actually feels. Marge means every word of this. The advice comes from her own experience of navigating a world that has not always made room for what she feels. She is giving Lisa what she knows. The episode is careful not to make Marge the villain of this scene. She is a mother trying to help her daughter survive. The survival she is offering, however, requires Lisa to become smaller. Lisa tries to follow this advice. The scene of her doing so, walking down the school hallway with a fixed grin, while other students take advantage of her forced agreeableness, is one of the most quietly devastating sequences in the show's early run. She lets classmates push past her. She smiles at her own mistreatment. She plays the notes on the page in band practice rather than the notes she hears in her own head. Mr. Largo, who had previously found her improvisation disruptive, now finds her compliant and is satisfied. The episode makes clear, without stating it directly, that the advice Marge has given her, though well-intentioned, is advice about how to become a smaller version of herself. The hallway scene is only a few seconds long. It lands with the force of something much longer, because by this point the episode has established, precisely and without sentimentality, exactly what is being suppressed. Marge eventually sees what she has done. She watches her daughter absorbing punishment with a plastered-on smile, and understands that she has not helped Lisa cope. She has helped Lisa disappear. She reverses her advice. She tells Lisa to be herself. She tells her that her feelings, all of them, are hers to have. The scene between them is brief, and does not over-explain itself, which is part of what makes it work. The episode trusts the audience to understand what has shifted without spelling it out. The episode ends at a jazz club called the Jazz Hole, where Bleeding Gums Murphy is performing, and the whole family has come to listen. He plays a blues number that Lisa wrote, a song about the specific sadness of being in her particular family. Homer, sitting in the audience, hears a lyric that describes him in unflattering terms. His reaction, rather than anger, is a kind of baffled acceptance. The show uses the moment to do something it would return to many times over the years, finding in a comedy beat the exact emotional truth of a relationship. Homer does not fully understand his daughter. He never entirely will. His response to her music is authentic within those limits. The episode does not ask him to change. It asks him only to listen, and he does. And the willingness to listen across a gap that neither of them can fully close is presented as something worth having. Gene and Reese, the writers who had been uncertain about the assignment, finished the script and watched it come to life and realized it had worked. Yeardley Smith, who voices Lisa, has said in interviews that Moaning Lisa is one of her favorite episodes of the entire series. It is not difficult to understand why. The episode is the first time the full emotional range of what Smith would eventually be asked to bring to the role is on display. She has spoken about the specific challenge of playing sadness that has no cause, grief that cannot be explained or resolved through plot. Lisa's melancholy in this episode is not attached to an event. It does not end when the episode ends. It is simply part of who she is, a condition of her existence, and Smith plays it from the inside rather than performing it from the outside. The show's producers felt similarly about what the episode had accomplished. Al Jean noted in later commentary that Moaning Lisa demonstrated something about what the show was capable of that had not been fully articulated before. The writers had been discovering the limits of the comedy format, experimenting with how far they could push jokes while keeping the characters grounded. Moaning Lisa showed them a different set of limits. The show could go inward. It could sit with a child's unnameable sadness and not try to resolve it into a punchline. James L. Brooks, who had been trying to make an episode like this for years before the show existed, had finally found the format in which it could work. What the episode established, and what would remain true about Lisa for the rest of the show's run, was the connection between her genius and her grief. These two things were not presented as separate qualities that happened to occupy the same character. They were presented as the same quality expressed in two different directions. The intelligence that made Lisa capable of understanding the world with more precision than the people around her was the same quality that made her feel the world's suffering more acutely. She was 8 years old, and she was worrying about things that grown adults in Springfield had long since decided to stop thinking about. The saxophone was the place where both things converged. When she played the blues, she was using her musical intelligence to give form to the emotional weight of knowing too much. Bleeding Gums Murphy recognized this in her instantly. The exchange between them on the bridge was not a lesson exactly, more a recognition. He was not teaching her something she did not know. He was confirming something she had already figured out but had no framework for. The show was making an argument, quietly, that a child's interior life could be as complex and as valid as any adult's, and that the people who most needed someone to confirm that were precisely the children who had been told, in various ways, to keep it to themselves. Murphy does not treat Lisa's sadness as a problem he is solving. He treats it as something true, and the act of treating it as true is the thing that helps her. In a 9th season episode called Lisa's Sax, a flashback reveals that Homer and Marge discovered Lisa's unusual intelligence when she was very young, and that they purchased the instrument as a way to encourage her gifts when the school she attended lacked the resources to do anything useful with them. Homer bought the saxophone after a school psychologist recognized what Lisa was. The saxophone arrived in her life as a solution to the problem of being extraordinary in an ordinary place. It stayed as the expression of everything she was. In Moaning Lisa, the saxophone connected her to something larger than Springfield, larger than the school she attended, and the family she lived with, and the town that did not know what to do with her. The music that Bleeding Gums Murphy made on that bridge was part of a tradition that had been holding that kind of knowledge for a very long time. Lisa, in a cartoon show on Fox in 1990, stepped into that tradition at the age of 8, on a bridge at night, with a stranger who understood what she was doing before she finished a note. The episode ratings were not remarkable. Moaning Lisa finished 34th in the weekly ratings during the week it aired, with a Nielsen number of 13.8. The show was not yet the cultural institution it would become, and an episode built around a child's depression was not an obvious bid for mass viewership. What it was, and what it remains when people look back at the first season now, is the episode that told everyone involved what the show could be if it was willing to be honest. The comedy was already there. The emotional core was there too. The question was whether the show would be brave enough to use it. The answer, over the following years, would be yes, and the character those years would most depend on for that work was the girl on the bridge, Lisa Simpson, playing something slow and blue into the Springfield night, finding out that the world was full of suffering she had already known about, and that there was a man sitting on a bridge who had turned that knowledge into music and survived it. She took the saxophone home. She kept it. She played it for the rest of the show's run, in hospital rooms and jazz clubs and school auditoriums, and the backyard at night when no one was listening. Every time she played, something of Moaning Lisa was still there, the first time anyone had asked what was going on inside her head and been surprised by the depth of what they found. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Moaning Lisa gave Lisa the saxophone, the blues, and a mentor she would carry with her for the rest of the show. What came next was an episode built around a Hollywood legend recording under a false name and 4 words on a piece of paper that many writers still consider the most important lines in the show's history. Section 3, The Note on the Train Platform. John Vitti is credited as the writer of the 19th episode of the 2nd season. He has spent years explaining, in interviews and DVD commentaries, that this credit tells only part of the story. Vitti was a genuine talent who contributed real work to the script, and he would go on to write some of the finest episodes in the show's history, including the 4th season masterpiece Cape Fear. His voice is in the episode. But according to Vitti himself, the person most responsible for what made Lisa's substitute extraordinary was not in the writer's room at all. It was the show's producer, James L. Brooks, who had already demonstrated with Moaning Lisa that he understood something about Lisa Simpson that other people were still catching up to. Brooks had an unusual level of involvement in this particular episode. Vitti described it as the episode in the show's history in which Brooks contributed more than any other. Specific lines of dialogue came directly from Brooks rather than from the writing staff. The emotional architecture of the episode, the shape of what it was trying to say, and how it wanted to say it, bore Brooks's fingerprints in ways that most episodes did not. At the time it was being made, the writer's room had been developing a confidence in the show's comedy and was eager to push that further. Lisa's substitute was, in Vitti's own description, the biggest, huggiest, warmest, and fuzziest episode at a moment when the staff was starting to want something else entirely. It was controversial inside the room. It was also, for many people who have spent time studying the show, the best thing the series produced in its first 2 seasons. The episode aired on April 25, 1991, in the show's 2nd season. The premise was simple. Lisa's 2nd-grade teacher, Miss Hoover, goes on medical leave after convincing herself she has Lyme disease. The school assigns a substitute. His name is Mr. Bergstrom, and from the moment he walks into the classroom, Lisa understands that she is in the presence of someone different. Mr. Bergstrom does not teach the way Miss Hoover teaches. Miss Hoover is a competent professional running out the clock in a school that does not ask much of her. Bergstrom is something else. He arrives at class dressed as a 19th century cowboy and invites the students to find the 3 anachronisms in his costume. The premise of the exercise is that learning history means learning to see what does not belong, to notice the gap between what should be there and what actually is. Lisa finds 2 of the anachronisms quickly. The revolver, she says, was not invented until 1835. The state of Texas belt buckle could not have existed before Texas became a state in 1845. The third anachronism, a digital wristwatch on Bergstrom's wrist, she misses entirely. He is not embarrassed that a student caught 2 of 3. He is delighted. The exercise worked. For Lisa, this moment is the beginning of something she has not experienced at Springfield Elementary before. A teacher who is interested in her mind rather than her compliance. A teacher who designs lessons around the act of thinking rather than the act of memorizing. A teacher who seems to understand, without being told, that there are students for whom school is a kind of slow suffocation, where the intelligence they arrived with is treated as a management problem rather than something to cultivate. She becomes attached to Bergstrom quickly. The attachment has the specific quality of a child who has been understimulated for so long that the first genuinely stimulating presence in her environment becomes overwhelming. She talks about him constantly at home. She plans to invite him to dinner. She runs into him at a museum, which is where the episode introduces its most important complication, the figure of Homer Simpson, standing in the middle of a natural history exhibit, being Homer Simpson. Homer at the museum is not malicious. He is simply himself, which in this context is the source of the problem. He laughs too loudly at the wrong things. He tells the ticket taker that the suggested donation is not mandatory and refuses to pay it. He makes a comment about a displayed Egyptian mummy being less creepy than the Wolfman. He assumes, when Bergstrom mentions that Lisa's homework is always exceptionally neat, that his own persuasive charm is somehow responsible for her grades rather than her intelligence and diligence. Lisa watches all of this happen from a few feet away, mortified. Bergstrom sees it too. He takes Homer aside, gently and without judgment, and says something that Homer receives poorly in the moment and better later. He suggests that Homer could be a more positive presence in his daughter's life, that she is looking for something from him that he has not yet thought to provide. Homer does not know how to hear this. He is not a malicious father. He simply has no framework for the kind of daughter he has. The conversation does not resolve cleanly. Homer goes home a little confused. Lisa goes home a little embarrassed. The dinner invitation does not happen. The episode's central crisis arrives when Lisa learns that Miss Hoover has returned. Her Lyme disease, it turns out, was psychosomatic. She is healthy. She is back. And Bergstrom, whose nature is to move toward the places and people who need him most, has accepted a job in Capital City and is leaving Springfield. Lisa finds out at the worst possible moment, having already gone to his apartment to invite him to dinner. The apartment is empty. A neighbor confirms he is on his way to the train station. She runs. The train station scene is one of the most carefully constructed pieces of filmmaking the show produced in its early years. Lisa arrives on the platform while the train is still there. She finds Bergstrom. She tells him, in tears, that she will be lost without him, that he is the only teacher who has ever understood her, that the thought of going back to the way things were before he arrived is something she cannot bear. He listens to all of this. He does not dismiss it or minimize it. He tells her the truth, which is that his life is built on being needed somewhere else, that his value as a teacher comes from his willingness to keep moving toward the children who most need what he has to offer. That Springfield has other children who need him, but Capital City has children who need him more. This is not what Lisa wants to hear. It is what he has to say. The life of a substitute teacher, he tells her, means perpetual transition. He is not choosing to leave her. He is choosing to do the work the way the work requires being done. He takes a piece of paper and writes something on it. He tells her that whenever she feels alone, the contents of that note are all she needs to know. He boards the train. It pulls away. She opens the paper. 4 words. "You are Lisa Simpson." James L. Brooks wrote that line. Vitti has confirmed this in multiple interviews. He also confirmed that the line was supposed to end with an exclamation point, and that he failed to catch the omission during the animatic review stage. The lack of the exclamation point is, by his account, account, something that has stayed with him across every subsequent year of his career. The note reads, without the punctuation, as a statement. With it, it would have read as an affirmation, a declaration, a small piece of noise against the silence that closes in on a child when the only adult who really saw her has just disappeared down the tracks. Either way, what the note says is this: the identity she carries, the specific particular fact of being exactly who she is enough. It is more than enough. It is the whole thing. The actor behind Mr. Bergstrom was Dustin Hoffman. He was not credited under his own name. He had been uncertain about attaching himself to a cartoon program, a reluctance that was common among prominent performers in the show's early seasons, when animated television still occupied a different tier of cultural prestige than it would later acquire. He recorded under the pseudonym Sam Eddick. This was Brooks's suggestion, and Hoffman liked it immediately. Sam Eddick is a play on the word Semitic, a quiet joke that acknowledged both Hoffman's own background and the Jewish identity the writers had given to Bergstrom. The episode contains a number of other allusions to Hoffman's film career, particularly to The Graduate, in which Hoffman played a young man being pursued by an older woman. Mrs. Krabappel, the fourth-grade teacher who appears briefly in the episode's B-plot, flirts with Bergstrom in a scene that lifts the visual grammar of that film, the famous shot framed through a woman's leg, and transplants it into a Springfield hallway. The recording session required travel. The entire voice cast flew to New York to record with Hoffman, and the sessions were directed by Brooks rather than by the episode's credited director, Rich Moore. Yeardley Smith, who has spoken about the experience in several interviews, described the recording day as one in which she genuinely grew as an actress. Working alongside someone with Hoffman's precision and commitment in the booth changed how she understood what was possible in a voice performance. The scene at the train station, in which Lisa is crying and Bergstrom is measured and kind and refusing to be what she needs him to be in that moment, required Smith to find something real inside the format of a cartoon, and the presence of the person across the recording session from her made that easier to access. There was a technical complication. Al Jean recalled that when the audio track came back from New York, Hoffman's voice was too low on the scenes where Bergstrom was supposed to sing. The production was concerned that the musical moments would not register properly on broadcast. Hoffman was brought back into a studio in Los Angeles to re-record those sections. The singing Bergstrom that millions of viewers heard was assembled from two separate recording sessions on opposite coasts. Nobody watching the episode could tell. Mr. Bergstrom was physically modeled on Mike Reiss, who had been one of the show's first showrunners and who was, by the time of this episode's production, still deeply embedded in the show's creative life. The character's face and general appearance were drawn to match Reiss's, which gave Bergstrom a visual specificity that most one-episode characters did not have. He looked like a real person because he was based on one. The B-plot of the episode follows Bart running for class president against Martin Prince. Bart is funny and charming during the campaign. He wins over the entire class with jokes and confidence. He is so confident of victory, and his supporters are so confident that on election day, none of them actually vote. Martin wins with 2 votes. The subplot functions partly as comedy and partly as a structural counterpoint to Lisa's story, where Lisa's arc is about a genius who finally encounters someone who sees her and loses that person. Bart's arc is about someone who mistakes being liked for being safe, who discovers that confidence without follow-through produces nothing. The 2 stories end in different kinds of loss, and the episode does not try to make either one feel better than it is. Homer's visit to Bart at the end of the episode, in which he finds a way to explain losing that actually helps, is one of the funnier sequences in the episode, and it works because it follows naturally from Homer being Homer rather than from Homer trying to be a better father. What the episode did to the show's understanding of Lisa was significant in ways that writers and critics would continue to point to for decades. It was the argument made in full, for the first time, that Lisa's intelligence was inseparable from her emotional vulnerability. That being the smartest person in the room, at 8 years old, in Springfield, was not a source of power, it was a source of need. She needed to find the people who could meet her where she was. Those people were rare, and they never stayed. Bergstrom left. Bleeding Gums Murphy, introduced in the first season, would eventually die. The show was establishing a pattern that it would return to many times. Lisa encounters someone who genuinely sees her. The encounter is brief and formative, and then it ends, and she carries it forward into a life that keeps presenting itself as ordinary when she knows it is not. The television critic Emily St. James, writing years after the episode aired, said that many of the finest moments the show produced in its later seasons were only possible because Lisa's substitute had been made first. The argument was that the episode episode set a standard for what the show could do with a character's interiority. Other comedies had emotional episodes. The Simpsons, in this episode, demonstrated that an emotional episode could be as precisely constructed as a comic one, that the tools of good writing, structure, restraint, specificity applied equally to both, and that a character could carry real tragedy inside a format that was also capable of staging Mrs. Krabappel trying to seduce a substitute teacher while a graduate reference played out in the hallway of an elementary school. Hoffman, years later, would be recognized for the performance under his own name, the pseudonym held for the original broadcast. The following morning, a newspaper reported that the voice in the credits sounded remarkably like a famous actor, and that the episode had contained a number of references to that actor's most famous early role. By the following week, the secret was largely out. His contract had stipulated that his name could not be used in credits or publicity, and that commitment was honored. The audience figured it out anyway. They always do. The note stayed. 4 words on a piece of paper handed through a train window to a crying 8-year-old who had just lost the only teacher in her short life who had fully understood what she was. The genius of Lisa Simpson was not only in what she could do with her mind, it was in what her mind made her feel, and in how completely she felt it, and in how the show kept finding new ways to test whether that feeling was something she would be broken by or something she would be made of. Bergstrom's note was the first answer to that question. She was Lisa Simpson. That was the whole argument. It would take the rest of the show to prove it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Lisa's substitute established the pattern that would repeat across decades. A genius who finds someone who truly sees her and then has to keep going after that person is gone. What followed in season 3 was the episode that flipped both siblings into each other's roles and revealed what Lisa's intelligence cost her when the system decided it had no use for it. Section 4. What the system said she could be. George Meyer was one of the most talented writers in the history of American television comedy, and he wrote most of the 18th episode of the 3rd season almost entirely by himself. Mike Rice, who was serving as showrunner alongside Al Jean at the time, recalled that Meyer needed very little assistance from the rest of the staff. The first draft was close to the final script. The changes between what Meyer pitched in the room and what eventually aired were minor. By the standards of a writer's room that typically ran every script through a gauntlet of rewrites, group notes, and wholesale structural revisions, this was unusual enough to be worth remarking on. Meyer had seen something in the premise that did not require much clarification. The premise was a simple inversion. What if the show took Bart Simpson and Lisa Simpson and swapped them? What if the wildest kid in Springfield became the most obedient, and the most obedient became the most wild? The swap was triggered by a school aptitude test, and the aptitude test was named, deliberately, with an acronym that also spelled the word can't: the Career Aptitude Normalization Test. The name was a comment on what aptitude tests actually do to the people who take them, which is normalize out of existence every quality that does not fit the category the test was designed to measure. The episode aired on February 27, 1992. It was the 53rd episode of the series overall, and the kind of episode that the show could only produce because it had spent 2.5 seasons building a precise understanding of who these two characters were. Inversions only work when the audience knows what is being inverted. By the time Separate Vocations arrived, enough had been established about Bart and Lisa that watching them exchange personalities felt genuinely disorienting in the specific way that good television disorientation feels, like the ground has shifted beneath familiar furniture. The test comes back from the scoring center with results that make a certain institutional sense and no human sense at all. Bart Simpson, habitual rule breaker and hall-haunting menace, has been identified as ideally suited to police work. His instinct for authority, his ability to read a situation, his talent for knowing which rules matter and which ones can be pushed, apparently translates, on paper, into a law enforcement profile. The test is not entirely wrong about him. What it does not understand is that these qualities can belong to a person who would never, under any circumstances, willingly operate within an institution. Lisa's results are worse. The test says she should become a homemaker. For a viewer in 1992, and for a viewer now, the result lands as a punch. This is a character who has demonstrated across 3 seasons one of the most formidable intellects in Springfield. She is 8 years old, and she is smarter than almost every every adult the show has put on screen. She reads difficult scientific journals for pleasure. She has solved mysteries that baffled the adults around her. She has displayed musical intelligence, emotional intelligence, and a moral reasoning capability that would put most grown members of the Springfield community to shame. And a computer, running her results through whatever algorithm the Career Aptitude Normalization Test uses to sort children into futures, has told her that her ideal life involves keeping a house. The music teacher at Springfield Elementary makes it worse. He examines Lisa's hands and delivers a verdict with the casual cruelty of someone who does not understand that they are being cruel. Her fingers, he tells her, are too short. She will never be a professional saxophone player. The physical fact of her anatomy has disqualified her from the career she loves, and the system she is enrolled in has simultaneously disqualified her from the career she was building in her mind. Two doors closing at once, and no one in the room has the imagination to suggest that doors are not the only way to go anywhere. Lisa's response to this is not immediate, which is one of the things the episode understands about how grief works. She does not storm out or break down. She absorbs the information and carries it for a while. She tries to hold her usual self together, but the weight of what she has been told is too specific and too absolute to simply set aside. The message is not that she is struggling. The message is that the thing she is struggling toward is not available to her. The future she had been building in her imagination does not exist. The test has facts to back this up. The teacher has anatomy to back this up. What does a genius do when the systems designed to identify genius have decided she does not qualify? The answer, in this episode, is that she goes sideways. Lisa starts spending time in the bad girl's bathroom. This exists as a location in Springfield Elementary, with the weight of actual transgression behind it. It is the place the school's most determined rule breakers gather, and it functions as a small republic of contempt for every value the school is supposed to represent. Lisa walks in. The girls tell her she is in the wrong bathroom. She tells them she is exactly where she means to be. She has decided, with the precision she applies to everything, to go bad. She does not go bad sloppily or by accident. She goes bad deliberately, as a logical response to a system that has offered her no other direction worth pointing herself in. The escalation continues. She hauls Skinner's prized Puma Pride statue out of his office, the object he treats as the sacred center of his institutional authority, and threatens to destroy it if the school does not meet her demand for greater individual freedom. The demand itself is almost funny in how it reflects her usual analytical clarity, applied now to the project of causing maximum disruption. She is not rebelling randomly. She is rebelling with the same methodical attention she brings to a saxophone solo or a book report. The theft that caps her rebellion is the most audacious act she commits in the episode, and one of the most revealing things the show ever did with her character. She steals the teacher's edition textbooks, every single one. She clears the faculty of their answer keys in a single coordinated operation and hides them all in her locker. The next day, the school's teaching staff discovers that without the books that told them what to say, they have almost nothing to say. Mrs. Krabappel's class descends into chaos. Miss Hoover cannot manage her students. Teachers who have been presenting themselves as authorities for years turn out, when the answer books are removed, to have been performing authority rather than possessing it. The episode has enormous fun with this sequence, but what it reveals beneath the comedy is something specific about Lisa's situation. She has always known that most of the adults around her are less competent than their positions suggest. Her intelligence has always allowed her to see the gap between what authority claims to know and what it actually knows. The theft is not random vandalism, it is exposure. She has found the most efficient way to prove what she has always quietly understood, and she has done it with the same methodical intelligence that makes her a brilliant student. The genius that the test dismissed is the same genius that brought the entire faculty to its knees in one afternoon. Bart, meanwhile, has discovered that he is good at the job of hall monitor. This is the episode's most uncomfortable truth, the one that lands differently the longer it sits. Bart takes to institutional authority the way a natural musician takes to a new instrument. The instincts are all there. He walks the hallways issuing demerits with the calm efficiency of someone who has always understood how power works, and who can now apply that understanding from the inside rather than the outside. His His grades improve. His teachers are amazed. Principal Skinner, who has spent years chasing Bart through corridors and filling out disciplinary forms in triplicate, finds himself standing next to the same boy in a position of mutual authority and experiencing the uncanny sensation of being pleased about it. The show draws a brief but pointed parallel between Skinner and Bart in this episode. Skinner, it is revealed, once took a similar aptitude test and was told his best path was school administration. He had wanted to study astronomy. The test redirected him into a career he has spent decades inhabiting without ever seeming to genuinely inhabit. He accepted the result. He became what the test said he should become. The implication, kept light enough not to overwhelm the episode's comic register, is that Skinner's hollow institutional authority is at least partly the product of having listened to a machine tell him who to be. He is standing in a hallway he was redirected into by a form that did not know him, administering a school that is running a test on the next generation of children that will redirect them into their own wrong hallways. The scene where Bart finds Lisa's locker and realizes she took the books is one of the best written scenes in the episode. She confesses to him quickly, which is right. She has no interest in lying to Bart about something this deliberate. She explains to him, in a version of the words she has been carrying since the test results came back, that she was rebelling against a future she cannot accept, that the system told her she had no future worth having, and that she could not keep pretending the information did not matter. Bart listens. What Bart does next is the thing the episode will always be remembered for, the moment that justifies everything that has been built toward it. He takes the blame. He tells Skinner that he was the one who stole the books. He accepts the detention that Lisa would have received, the detention that would have been recorded in her permanent academic file and would have followed her forward into whatever future she eventually found. He does this without being asked and without expecting acknowledgement. When Lisa asks him why, he tells her that she is going to be a success and that she should not destroy that because the school made her angry for a week. The show is making two things clear simultaneously in this scene. The first is that Bart's intelligence, the kind that the aptitude test identified as police material, is also capable of this particular form of moral reasoning. He understands the asymmetry of what a disciplinary record would do to his life compared to what it would do to hers. He is not giving up much. She would be giving up everything. The second is that Lisa's genius, the kind that the test dismissed and the music teacher dismissed, and the school's entire institutional apparatus has been quietly dismissing since she walked in the door, is the thing that Bart is protecting. He does not need to be told its value. He knows it. He has watched it from across the dinner table their whole lives. The episode ends with Lisa sitting outside the room where Bart is serving his detention, playing the saxophone through the door. It is a small scene and a quiet one, played without dialogue. The sound of the instrument carries the whole relationship between these two siblings, the one who absorbs consequences and the one who produces music, looking after each other in a school that was never designed to look after either of them. The aptitude test did not identify what Lisa could do. What the episode argues, through Bart's decision in Skinner's office, is that the test's failure to identify her value does not change the value. It is still there. It is the thing that needs protecting, even when the system doing the assessing has decided it is not worth measuring. Separate Vocations was seen by approximately 13.5 million viewers in its original American broadcast, finishing 29th in the weekly ratings with a Nielsen number of 14.8. Those numbers place it solidly in the mid-range of the show's performance during a season that was already one of the strongest in its history. But the episode's reputation has grown considerably in the decades since. Writers and critics who have spent time with the show consistently place it among the most structurally precise episodes of the entire run. George Meyer, who wrote it nearly alone, produced something that understood both children well enough to flip them completely and still have them feel exactly like themselves. The career aptitude test eventually became a recurring presence in discussions about education, standardized assessment, and the gap between what institutions measure and what people are actually capable of. Separate Vocations was a comedy episode about a cartoon family. It was also a coherent argument about what happens to intelligent children when the systems designed to support them decide they have no use for what those children bring. Lisa, at the end of the episode, has not changed. The test was wrong about her. She knows it. The show knows it. Bart, who took detention for her, knows it. She plays the saxophone outside the detention room door, and the music goes right through through the wall. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Separate vocations showed what happened when the system tried to tell Lisa who she was allowed to be, and gave Bart one of the most quietly heroic moments in the show's history. The next turning point came a few seasons later, when a beetle arrived with a condition attached, and a single conversation on a rooftop locked something about Lisa's character in place forever. Section 5. The Beetle's Condition. David X. Cohen was not yet going by that name. In 1995, he was still David S. Cohen, a young writer who had recently joined the Simpson staff and whose most substantial contribution to the show, to that point, had been a segment in the Treehouse of Horror anthology episode from the previous season. He was sitting in the writer's room one afternoon when he picked up a piece of paper and wrote down a question. 4 words, essentially a premise, handed to no one in particular and not yet attached to any plan. The question was whether Lisa might become a vegetarian. The room liked it. Showrunner David Merkin liked it especially. Merkin had recently stopped eating meat himself, motivated by his affection for animals and by environmental concerns he had been developing over several years. He was a vegetarian in a writer's room that spent a significant portion of its working day discussing what to have for lunch, and he recognized in Cohen's idea something that could do more than produce a good episode of television. It could, if handled correctly, bring in a guest who had been on the show's wish list since the early seasons. Paul McCartney was the only surviving member of the Beatles who had not yet appeared on The Simpsons. Ringo Starr had guest starred in a second season episode called Brush with Greatness in 1991. George Harrison had appeared in Homer's Barbershop Quartet in 1993, a fourth season episode built around the premise that Homer had briefly been a member of a Grammy-winning vocal group in the late 1980s. John Lennon had been murdered in 1980, before the show existed. McCartney was the remaining piece of the set. The staff had wanted to get him onto the show for years and had never found the right vehicle. Cohen's idea about Lisa and vegetarianism, Merkin decided, was finally that vehicle. McCartney was a well-known vegetarian. He and his wife Linda had been deeply committed to animal rights and plant-based eating for years. Linda had written a vegetarian cookbook and had developed a line of vegetarian prepared foods. Paul had been involved with organizations advocating for animal welfare and had spoken publicly about his beliefs on multiple occasions. An episode in which Lisa Simpson, the moral conscience of her family, decided to stop eating meat after encountering a living animal at a petting zoo was the kind of story that Paul McCartney might actually care about rather than simply finding professionally convenient. Merkin contacted the McCartney camp. The response was encouraging. Paul and Linda were fans of the show. They were open to the idea. And then the condition arrived. It was simple and absolute. Paul McCartney would agree to appear in the episode on one condition only: that Lisa Simpson remain a vegetarian for the rest of the series. She could not revert to eating meat in the following episode, which was the standard operating procedure on a show committed to resetting its characters to a reliable status quo at the end of every half hour. Whatever Lisa decided in this episode would have to be a genuine, permanent decision. McCartney was not interested in lending himself to a story that would be undone the following week. The production team agreed. It was not a trivial commitment. The show had spent 6 seasons building a particular relationship with change, which was that it mostly did not happen. Characters aged but did not age. Homer made mistakes and recovered from them. Bart failed tests and passed them. The world of Springfield was elastic enough to absorb almost anything and return to its previous shape by the time the credits rolled. Agreeing to make Lisa's vegetarianism permanent was agreeing to let something stick, to carry a consequence forward across every future episode in which food or family dinners or Homer's barbecue appeared. The writing staff understood what they were signing up for. They signed. Merkin flew to London. Matt Groening was supposed to go with him and missed his plane. Merkin made the trip alone, stopping first at a New York health food store to pick up a container of his favorite meat-free turkey substitute as a gift for the McCartneys. He arrived in England, checked into his hotel, and was driven for roughly 90 minutes to Paul and Linda's estate in Sussex. He brought the turkey substitute out and handed it over. His expectation was that they would try a small amount of it carefully. Instead, the two of them ate directly from the container with an enthusiasm that surprised him. The gift had gone over better than anticipated. The recording session, which took place at Paul McCartney's private studio, lasted about an hour. The McCartneys recorded their dialogue, asked questions about the episode, and showed a genuine investment in how Lisa's story would be handled. The episode itself begins at a place called Storytown Village, a petting zoo and amusement park that the Simpson family visits on a day trip. Groening originally noted the irony that Marge had promised the trip would be fun for everyone, including Lisa, who is 8 and therefore technically too old for the park's intended age range. At the zoo, Lisa encounters a lamb. The animal is gentle and responsive and looks at her with the specific kind of uncomplicated affection that animals in petting zoos sometimes manage. She scratches its head, it presses against her hand, she names it in her mind, or near enough. That night at dinner, Marge serves lamb chops. The connection between the animal at the zoo and the food on the plate arrives in Lisa's mind with a clarity she cannot reverse. Homer offers his standard logic, which is that a lamb is not the same as a lamb chop, and that the emotional response she is having to a piece of food has no rational basis. This is not a helpful argument to make to an 8-year-old who just spent 20 minutes bonding with the thing on her plate. Lisa decides at that dinner table that she will not eat meat. The episode that follows is one of the sharpest pieces of social comedy the show produced in its middle seasons. Homer's response to his daughter's decision is pitched perfectly. He does not understand vegetarianism as a concept, and he does not want to. He cannot accept that ham, bacon, and pork chops all come from the same animal, which the show treats as a joke about Homer's selective relationship with reality, but which also, in its absurdity, captures something true about how people choose not to think about the food they eat. The family cooks instructional videos warning children about vegetarians. The school serves Lisa a single piece of broccoli on an otherwise empty plate. Classmates ask her whether she plans to marry a carrot. The social pressure is relentless, low-level, and recognizable to anyone who has ever held a minority position on something that other people eat for pleasure. Lisa holds. Her intelligence, which has always been the instrument through which she understands the world's injustices, has now turned toward this specific one, and she cannot unsee it. But the episode is careful not to make her simply right in a way that lets her off the hook morally. She gets self-righteous. She ruins Homer's barbecue by hijacking the roast pig and sending it airborne down the street. She pushes her beliefs on people who have not asked for her opinion. The show knows the difference between having correct values and expressing those values in a way that is tolerable to live with, and it puts Lisa on the wrong side of that line for long enough to complicate the story. The resolution comes through Apu, the proprietor of the Quick E-Mart, who turns out to be a vegan himself. This is a revelation the episode treats as a throwaway detail, but which carries real weight on reflection. Apu has been eating tofu hot dogs without telling his customers, and he switched without making an announcement, and no one noticed the difference. He did not need the people around him to change in order to be who he was. He is the one who says to Lisa, in the episode's most quoted exchange, that he learned long ago to tolerate others rather than force his beliefs on them, and that influence works better than pressure. Apu then takes Lisa through a hidden passageway to a garden on the roof of the Quick E-Mart, where Paul and Linda McCartney are sitting in the sun. They are presented as old friends of Apu from Paul's time in India during the late 1960s, a period when the Beatles spent time studying with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The episode plays fast and loose with the precise timeline of when Paul and Linda actually met, but the writers were not making a documentary, and the inaccuracy does not break anything. What matters is the image: 3 vegetarians on a rooftop in Springfield, one of them the most famous musician in the world, all of them pointing the same direction and waiting for Lisa to figure out that she can move toward it without dragging everyone else along. The McCartney sequence contains one of the most layered jokes in the episode. Paul offers to play Lisa a song, and before he can begin, Apu breaks into a performance of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in a voice so off-key and so enthusiastic that both McCartneys snap along politely while Lisa backs away slowly. The joke works on multiple levels simultaneously, as physical comedy, as a commentary on the specific agony of hearing a beloved song performed badly by someone who loves it too much, and as a gentle deflation of the reverence that had surrounded the McCartney appearance from the moment the production announced it. The show could have played the cameo entirely straight. It chose to embed the cameo inside a joke that required Paul McCartney to react to someone singing his own music badly to his face. Paul and Linda also told Lisa that if she played the song "Maybe I'm Amazed" backwards, she would hear a recipe for a lentil soup. The credits of the episode run over a reversed version of the song, and if a viewer takes the time to play those credits backwards, they will hear Paul McCartney reading Linda's actual recipe for lentil soup. The Easter egg required effort from both the production and the audience. The McCartneys recorded the recipe specifically for this purpose. It was a gift embedded inside a gift, accessible only to the people willing to look for it. The episode received the Environmental Media Award and the Genesis Award from the Humane Society of the United States, both recognizing its treatment of animal rights and environmental themes. These were not honorary acknowledgments. The Environmental Media Award had been running since 1991 and was a legitimate prize with competitive entries from across the television and film industries. The Simpsons winning it for a mainstream animated comedy represented a genuine expansion of what the show was being recognized for. Linda McCartney died on April 17, 1998, from breast cancer. She was 56 years old. The news broke on a Thursday. The Simpsons episode that aired the following Sunday, Trash of the Titans, was dedicated to her memory in the closing credits. Mike Scully, who was showrunner by then, said it simply seemed like the right thing to do. Linda had given her time to the show because she believed in what the episode was saying, and the show wanted to acknowledge that her loss mattered. Paul McCartney, in the years since the episode aired, has kept track of the commitment the production made to him. David Merkin has told the story in multiple interviews of running into McCartney at industry events and being asked, sometimes surrounded by a ring of lawyers, whether Lisa was still a vegetarian. The answer has always been yes. There was one flashback in a later episode that showed Lisa eating bacon, but the dialogue in that scene explicitly established that the flashback was set before the events of Lisa the vegetarian, and therefore did not violate the agreement. The commitment was honored, and the lawyers, presumably, were satisfied. What the episode did to Lisa as a character was something more durable than a dietary change. Every previous piece of her genius had been primarily intellectual. She reasoned carefully, she analyzed evidence, she applied knowledge to problems, and arrived at correct conclusions faster than anyone around her. Lisa the vegetarian added an ethical dimension that was explicitly connected to her intelligence. She became a vegetarian because her mind had traced the logic of what eating meat meant all the way to its source, had visited that source at the petting zoo, and had found it impossible to continue once the connection had been made. Her genius was not separate from her conscience. They were the same operation, pointed in the same direction. The permanence of the change was also significant in a show that had largely avoided permanence. Characters on The Simpsons did not grow. They did not carry their decisions forward. The show's fundamental structure depended on a kind of elastic time in which yesterday's consequences did not crowd today's possibilities. Making Lisa's vegetarianism permanent was a break in that structure, a crack through which something real had entered. A famous musician had insisted on it. A production team had agreed. And from that agreement forward, whenever Lisa Simpson sat at a table and declined something from a plate, she was declining it because a particular story had made a particular choice, and that choice had been locked in by a man sitting in a garden on a rooftop in Springfield, surrounded by lawyers, waiting to be told that the cartoon girl was still doing what she said she would do. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Lisa the vegetarian made the show's most permanent character decision and proved that Lisa's genius operated through her ethics as much as her intellect. The season that followed brought the first real death in Springfield's history, and the question of what a genius does when the person who understood her most is suddenly gone. Section 6. The first time Springfield lost someone. Fox wanted 25 episodes. The production staff wanted to make something in the region of 23 or 24, which was already a punishing schedule for a show that required the level of craft and attention The Simpsons demanded by its 6th season. The network held firm. 25 episodes or nothing. The compromise that emerged from this disagreement was practical rather than elegant. 2 episodes per season would be farmed out, written and produced by people who were not part of the regular staff, giving the core team a small measure of relief from a workload that was threatening to overwhelm them. Al Jean and Mike Rice had served as showrunners through the 3rd and 4th seasons, the years that many longtime fans consider the show's creative peak. They had left after the 4th season to create The Critic, an animated comedy on ABC about a pompous New York film critic named Jay Sherman. The Critic had its admirers, but had not become the cultural phenomenon that The Simpsons was. Jean and Reese remained fond of the show they had helped build, and when the call came asking them to return and produce 2 episodes of the 6th season alongside the staff they had brought with them from The Critic, they accepted. The 2 episodes they produced were A Star is Burns, which caused some internal controversy because it functioned partly as a crossover advertisement for The Critic, and Round Springfield, which caused no controversy at all and became one of the most emotionally resonant episodes the show ever produced. Joshua Sternin and Jennifer Ventimiglia wrote the teleplay. Both were writers on The Critic who were devoted fans of The Simpsons, and the opportunity to write an episode of the show they admired was, by their own account, something they treated with considerable care. The story credit went to Al Jean and Mike Rice, who had developed the episode's central premise. Jean had been thinking for some time about killing a recurring character. The show had always held itself in a kind of elastic time, where death was a joke rather than a consequence, where characters endured slapstick injuries and improbable disasters and reset to their familiar selves by the following episode. Jean and the production team felt that at some point the show needed to do something different, a death that mattered, a loss that stayed. The question was who? All Jean's answer, offered with a deliberate casualness that masked how precise the choice actually was that it should not be anyone they would obviously want to see again. The example he used was Mr. Burns. You would not kill Mr. Burns. The character was too useful, too central to too many stories, too consistently funny in ways that could not be replicated. Whatever character was chosen had to be expendable in plot terms while remaining significant in emotional ones. It had to be someone whose absence would hurt without breaking the show's infrastructure. The choice fell on Bleeding Gums Murphy. He had appeared in a handful of episodes since his introduction in Moaning Lisa during the first season. He was present in the show's opening sequence, his silhouette visible on a bridge as the camera swept across Springfield in the title card that aired at the beginning of every episode. He was minor enough that losing him would not create structural problems. He was significant enough to Lisa that losing him would create something much harder to resolve than a structural problem. The episode's director was Stephen Dean Moore, making his directorial debut on the show. His first job in animation, years earlier, had been working in the department that produced Moaning Lisa. He had drawn frames for the episode in which Bleeding Gums Murphy first appeared, standing on a bridge in the Springfield night, playing for no one but the stars and a sad 8-year-old who had followed his music through town. Directing the episode in which Murphy died was, in his account, something he felt a particular connection to. The circle the show had drawn, from the first short with a saxophone and a bridge to the last one with a hospital room and a funeral, enclosed something real. The episode's structure divides itself between 2 stories of entirely different emotional registers, and this division is not accidental. The B plot involves Bart eating a piece of jagged metal from a box of Krusty O's cereal, developing appendicitis, being rushed to hospital, and ultimately suing Krusty the Clown for $100,000. It is played broadly as physical comedy, legal satire, and a running examination of the gap between the amount Bart wins and the amount that actually reaches him after his attorney Lionel Hutz has finished calculating his fees. Bart's take from his $100,000 settlement is $500. The joke is about the legal system and about Lionel Hutz specifically, but the $500 becomes, by the end of the episode, something more than a punchline. Lisa's story begins while Bart is in the hospital. She goes to visit him and, while walking the corridors of Springfield General, passes a ward she had not expected to find. Bleeding Gums Murphy is in a bed. He is sick. He does not explain precisely what is wrong with him. The show does not try to make the illness specific or clinical. He is simply, undeniably, a man who is running out of time. He seems genuinely happy to see Lisa. He loans her his saxophone for an upcoming school recital. He gives her advice about playing from her soul rather than from the notes on the page, a version of the lesson he taught her the first time they met on the bridge 5 years earlier in the show's timeline. He is generous with the time he has left, which is one of the quiet heroisms the episode builds into his final appearance without drawing attention to it. Lisa leaves the hospital and goes to the recital. The show has reduced the school orchestra down to 3 students for reasons connected to Bart's lawsuit, which briefly inspired an outbreak of classmates demanding appendectomies of their own. Lisa, Martin Prince, and Ralph Wiggum play. The performance begins badly. Then Lisa improvises. She plays the way Murphy taught her to play, from something internal and true, and the recital becomes something the audience had not expected. She finishes. She leaves the stage. She goes back to the hospital to tell Murphy about it. He is gone. He died while she was playing. The episode does not stage this as a dramatic revelation with a swelling score. A nurse tells her. The language is plain. Bleeding Gums Gums Murphy, who was in the hospital when she left, is no longer in the world she came back to. The moment passes through Lisa and lands in the viewer with a weight the episode has earned by spending its first half being generous about everything except this. The funeral is the episode's most quietly devastating sequence. Reverend Lovejoy conducts the service with the specific breed of pastoral incompetence the show had always assigned to him. He calls Murphy by the wrong name. Blood and Guts Murphy, he says at one point. Bloody Gums Murphy at another. He describes him as quite the sousaphone player. Lisa sits in the pews and watches the man who changed how she understood music be described by someone who never knew he existed. She is the only person in attendance who loved him. The show does not soften this. The funeral is small and wrong, and no one has come. She vows, in the cemetery, to make sure that Springfield knows the name Bleeding Gums Murphy. The mechanism she settles on is his sole recorded album, a record called Sax on the Beach. She needs the album to take to the local jazz station and have it played on air. She finds a copy at the Android's Dungeon, the comic book store. Comic book guy, in a display of the predatory opportunism the character was designed to embody, has already heard that Murphy died. He has doubled the price accordingly. The album now costs $500. Lisa does not have $500. Bart does. He walks into the store with his settlement money, intending to purchase what the episode describes as the ultimate collectible Pog, a promotional item featuring Steve Allen, who appears in the episode as himself. He sees Lisa's face when she comes out empty-handed. He looks at the album she wanted and the money he has. He buys the album. He gives it to her. When she asks why, he tells her she was the only one who believed him when he said his stomach hurt. The show is precise about this. The connection between Lisa believing Bart's pain at the beginning of the episode and Bart relieving Lisa's pain at the end is not spelled out. The audience finds it themselves, which is how the best versions of Bart and Lisa's relationship always work. Lisa takes the album to the jazz station. It is played. The signal from the station is too weak to reach most of Springfield, which is a joke that functions also as a metaphor. The idea that great unrecognized art exists at a frequency most people are not tuned to receive. Then, a bolt of lightning strikes the station's antenna and boosts the signal across the entire city. For one moment, in a cartoon, Springfield hears Bleeding Gums Murphy. The magical realism of the lightning bolt is the episode granting its own wish. The world the show built is willing, just this once, to conspire in favor of beauty. The closing sequence shows Murphy appearing to Lisa in the clouds. He is joined by Mufasa from The Lion King, Darth Vader, and a figure representing James Earl Jones's work as a CNN announcer, all of them characters associated with Jones's distinctive voice. The joke requires explanation only once. Bleeding Gums Murphy was voiced by Ron Taylor, but the cloud apparition versions of the James Earl Jones characters were performed by Harry Shearer, impersonating Jones rather than using the actor himself. Mufasa, in this scene, accidentally calls his son Kimba and corrects himself to Simba, which is a reference to the long-running debate about the Lion King's similarities to an older Japanese animated series called Kimba the White Lion. The episode embeds this cultural argument inside a joke about the afterlife in Springfield, which is exactly the kind of thing the show at its best could do without either element canceling the other out. Murphy plays one last duet with Lisa from the clouds. She plays below in Springfield. He plays above. The music connects them across whatever distance death has placed between them. Then the clouds move on. The sky is regular sky again. Lisa is alone with the saxophone he lent her and the fact that he is gone. The episode's title was a deliberate double reference. Thelonious Monk recorded a jazz standard called Round Midnight in 1944, one of the most covered compositions in the history of the genre, and a piece associated with the late hours and the blues tradition that Bleeding Gums Murphy inhabited. The French director Bertrand Tavernier made a film in 1986 called Round Midnight about a fictional jazz musician in Paris who is celebrated in Europe while being largely ignored in America. The show knew both references and meant both of them. Murphy was in the tradition of the unrecognized artist, the musician of extraordinary gifts, who dies without the audience his talent deserved, whose legacy is preserved only because someone who loved him refused to let it disappear. Ron Taylor, who had given Murphy his voice in Moaning Lisa and returned to the role here in his second and final appearance, died in 2002. He was 57 years old. He had spent his career in theater and television, and his 2 appearances on The Simpsons were among his most widely seen work. The character he voiced appeared in the show's opening sequence for years after Round Springfield aired, standing on his bridge, playing his saxophone against the Springfield skyline, visible every week to millions of viewers who may or may not have known that the musician in the silhouette had died in the 5th episode of the 6th season, mourned by a cartoon girl and a lightning bolt, and a jazz station whose signal finally reached everyone. The show had killed a character before in the sense of removing them from the story, but nothing before Round Springfield had been intended as a genuine death with genuine grief attached to it. The writers had been thinking about the question for a while and had arrived, through Al Jean's careful reasoning, at the precise character whose loss could bear the weight of the story they wanted to tell. In doing so, they opened a door in the show's universe that would not close again. Characters could die on The Simpsons now. The elastic time the show had always relied on had developed a crack, and through that crack, something real had entered. Murphy was the first through it. He would not be the last. Lisa played his record on the radio. The whole city heard it. Then it was over. She kept the saxophone. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Bleeding Gums Murphy died in the 6th season and gave the show its first real grief. Proved that the genius who played his music could carry loss as powerfully as she carried knowledge. A few years later, the show asked what would happen if Lisa's father became as smart as she was, and the answer broke both of them in ways neither expected. Section 7. The Coward's Way Out. Daniel Keyes published a short story in 1959 called Flowers for Algernon. It described a man of limited intellectual capacity who undergoes an experimental procedure that dramatically raises his intelligence, allowing him to experience the world in ways that had previously been closed to him, before the procedure begins to reverse, and he sinks back toward where he started. The story became a novel in 1966 and a film called Charlie in 1968, and it won awards in both forms. Its central question was one that literary science fiction had always been drawn to, not whether intelligence could be enhanced, but whether the enhancement was a gift or a punishment, and whether the person who received it would choose to keep it once they understood the full cost of being smarter than everyone around them. Al Jean, who had returned to The Simpsons as showrunner from the 13th season forward after his years away making The Critic, wrote the 9th episode of the 12th season by himself and named it Homia, the R reversed in the title as a direct reference to the poster design of the Charlie film. The episode aired on January 7, 2001. Jean had been thinking about the specific emotional territory the Flowers for Algernon premise could open up inside the show, and had identified what made the premise particularly powerful in this context. The Simpsons had spent 12 seasons establishing, in granular and comic detail, exactly what the gap between Homer Simpson and Lisa Simpson looked like from both sides. An episode in which Homer crossed that gap, briefly and entirely, was an episode about everything the show had been quietly saying about their relationship since the beginning. The episode does not begin with the central premise. It begins with Homer at an animation convention, discovering a motion capture technology that allows a person to control a cartoon character with their own body movements. He demonstrates this technology in front of a crowd with such obvious delight that he decides, on the spot, to invest the family's entire life savings in the company behind it. 2 days later, the company declares what the episode calls super-duper bankruptcy, and the money is gone. To recover his losses, Homer enrolls as a paid participant in medical testing at a research facility, submitting himself to a series of experiments in exchange for cash. During one experiment, the researchers take an X-ray of Homer's skull. What the X-ray reveals is the source of a joke the episode has been building toward, and a genuine piece of emotional architecture. Lodged in the tissue of Homer's frontal lobe, precisely positioned to suppress his cognitive function, is a crayon, a single wax crayon from a standard box, placed there during a childhood incident in which Homer was attempting to determine how many crayons he could fit into his nose at once. He managed to fit 16, he sneezed out 15, the 16th had been sitting in his brain ever since, reducing his intelligence to the level that 12 seasons of television had established as his factory setting. The researchers offer to remove it. Homer agrees. The surgery is performed. He wakes up, and the world is different. The early scenes of Smart Homer are played partly for comedy and partly for something more careful. He notices things he had not noticed before. He understands arguments he had previously had no framework for. He watches a romantic comedy at the cinema and, in the episode's funniest sequence, cannot stop pointing out the logical inconsistencies in the narrative until an usher removes him from the theater. He goes home and finds himself genuinely capable, for the first time, of keeping up with the conversations that happen at his dinner table. Marge and Bart do not quite know what to do with this. The family dynamic has been built on certain assumptions about who knows what, and one of the foundational ones is that Homer does not know very much. Lisa knows immediately that something has changed. She tests him, she asks him questions, and listens to his answers with the specific attention of someone who has spent years gauging the intelligence of the people around her and has rarely found anyone close to her own level. Homer passes. Not just passes, but surprises her. The crayon's removal has not simply brought him up to an average level. It has, according to the episode's logic, returned him to something close to his actual potential, which the show suggests may be considerably higher than the Homer everyone knows would imply. What follows is one of the most carefully rendered stretches of the episode, and one of the most emotionally precise things the show did in its 12th season. Homer and Lisa begin spending time together in ways they never have before. They go to the library and sit side by side reading books, each absorbed in their own material and comfortable in the other's silence. They have conversations at the dinner table that move fast and reach places the rest of the family cannot follow. Lisa laughs at things Homer says that are genuinely funny in the way that clever things are funny, rather than accidentally funny in the way that Homer's usual statements are funny. She is not performing enjoyment of his company. She is experiencing it. The episode is precise about what this costs her emotionally. She has spent her entire life in a household where her intelligence separated her from everyone she loved. She has had teachers who saw her, briefly, and left. She has had mentors who died. The one constant in her life has been her family, and within her family, the one constant has been that she is alone in her own head. Homer, with the crayon gone, is suddenly someone she does not have to translate herself for. The relief of that is visible in the episode without being stated. Yeardley Smith plays it in the register of a child who has found something she had stopped expecting to find. Homer, for his part, is experiencing the same world Lisa has always lived in, and the episode documents what that world actually feels like from the inside. He writes a report on the safety violations at the Springfield nuclear power plant, the facility where he has worked for 12 seasons while understanding almost nothing about what happens there. The report is accurate and thorough and results in the plant being shut down. His colleagues lose their jobs. He is correct about everything in the report. Being correct is not enough to make anyone grateful. He goes to Moe's Tavern and finds that the conversation he used to enjoy there has become impossible to participate in. The things that Barney and Moe and the other regulars find funny are no longer things Homer can find funny. The shared register of their interactions, the easy jokes and the comfortable complaints, and the social lubrication of people who have decided not to think too hard about anything is a register he can no longer tune into. He is not contemptuous of them. He does not look down on them in the way that the show's lesser versions of this story might have made him. He is simply unable to join them, and the inability is lonely in a way that has nothing to do with superiority and everything to do with the specific grief of finding that a place you loved no longer has room for who you have become. He also, during a conversation with Lisa about the state of human knowledge, accidentally produces a mathematical proof that God does not exist. The episode treats this as a throwaway gag, a single line delivered and then moved past, but it carries a weight the show has earned through 12 seasons of establishing Homer's relationship with faith as something comfortable and uncomplicated, a background warmth rather than a reasoned conviction. Smart Homer has reasoned his way out of that warmth. He cannot unreason his way back. The conversation between Homer and Lisa, in which he decides to have the crayon reinserted, is the episode's central scene, and it is written with a care that distinguishes it from the comedy surrounding it. Homer has been cataloging, methodically, everything that his intelligence has cost him. His friends, his job, or at least the goodwill of his workplace, his ability to enjoy the things he used to enjoy, his relationship with his own beliefs. Lisa listens to this accounting and understands what is coming. She tells him, in her own way, that she knows what it is like to be the smartest person in the room. She has known it her entire life. It is not always what people imagine it to be. Homer listens. He does not argue. He has experienced enough of Lisa's world to know that she is telling him something true. The show has spent the episode making the case that intelligence is a condition rather than a prize, that it comes with specific isolations and specific griefs that the people who do not have it tend not to understand. Homer, having briefly inhabited that condition, now understands it from the inside in a way that will not leave him even after the crayon goes back in. He makes his decision. He will have Mo perform the reinsertion. Mo is not a licensed physician. He is a bartender with access to a back room and no particular commitment to the Hippocratic Oath. The procedure is, medically speaking, an abomination. The episode plays it that way. Homer makes this choice with full awareness of what it costs him, specifically with full awareness of what it costs him in terms of the relationship with Lisa that the episode has spent 20 minutes building. He chooses to go back to being Homer. Before he has the crayon reinserted, he writes her a letter. He sets it on the kitchen counter where she will find it. The letter says that he is taking the coward's way out, and that before he does, he wants her to know that being smart made him appreciate how amazing she really is. It is not a sophisticated piece of writing. It is exactly the kind of thing Homer Simpson would write, with that particular combination of self-awareness and self-deprecation and deep love that the show had spent 12 seasons calibrating in his character. He knows what he is doing. He knows what it says about him. He writes it anyway because she deserves to hear it. Lisa finds the note after the procedure. Homer is already returned to himself, already comfortable and incurious, and exactly the father she has always had. He makes a sandwich. He references the sandwich in a joke that the episode uses as its final image, a gentle lowering of the register after the emotional height of the letter. Lisa reads the note. The tears are there. She crosses the kitchen and hugs him. He hugs her back. He does not fully remember writing the letter. He does not need to. The episode won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program at the 53rd Primetime Emmy Awards. It was nominated at the 29th Annie Awards in the writing category, with Gene receiving the nomination for the script. Critics at the time, and in subsequent years, placed it among the best episodes the show produced in its 12th season, a season that was not generally regarded as one of the show's strongest. Some placed it higher, among the best Lisa episodes across the entire run, which is a category that contains considerable competition. What the episode understood, and what it expressed in the letter Homer left on the counter, was that Lisa's genius had always been visible to the people around her, even when they could not share it. Homer had never been able to follow her reasoning, or keep up with her conversations, or find the things funny that she found funny. He had watched her from a distance, that the show had always played as comedy, and that the episode revealed, briefly, to be a form of grief on his side too. He loved his daughter with everything he had. What he had was not enough to meet her where she lived. The crayon episode gave him one episode's worth of access to that place, and he used it to write her a note, and then he put the crayon back in. Lisa kept the note. The show never returned to it directly. The note existed in the way that the most important things in the show existed, as something that had happened and remained true without needing to be revisited. Homer had been smart for 22 minutes of television and had used the smartest version of himself to tell his daughter that she was extraordinary. The regular version of Homer would go back to not being able to say that in words, but the note was on the counter. She had read it. The show trusted that to be enough, and it was. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Homer chose to go back to the crayon and left a letter that said everything he could not otherwise say. A few years earlier, the show had looked forward in time and built a version of Springfield in the year 2030, where Lisa had become the President of the United States, and where the man she succeeded had left a very different kind of mess for her to inherit. Section 8. The Futures She Was Given. James L. Brooks called David Merkin on the phone with a premise. He described it in broad terms, the way he tended to describe things at the pitching stage, confident in the shape of an idea before all the details had been filled in. The premise was this: the show would travel 15 years into the future, Lisa would meet the perfect man, and that perfect man would be unable to tolerate her family. Merkin recognized immediately what the premise was really about. The future was not the subject. The subject was the question the show had been circling around Lisa since the very beginning, the question of what her genius would cost her over the long run, and whether the people she loved were a price she would willingly pay. Merkin assigned the script to Greg Daniels, a writer who was building a reputation inside the room for the kind of work that required emotional precision alongside comic construction. Daniels would later go on to adapt The Office for American television and co-create King of the Hill, projects that shared with this episode a specific understanding of how ordinary lives contain extraordinary feeling when looked at from the right angle. He has said the episode was easier and more fun to write than he expected. The difficulty Merkin had anticipated in the premise did not materialize on the page in the way it sometimes does when a good idea turns out to be harder to execute than it appeared from a distance. Lisa's Wedding aired on March 19, 1995. It is the 19th episode of the 6th season, and it frames itself through a device the show used occasionally and carefully. Lisa visits a fortune-telling booth at a Renaissance fair attended by the Simpson family, and the fortune teller offers to show her the story of her first true love. The episode then moves to the year 2010, with Lisa at 23 attending a university whose quality is significantly beyond anything Springfield Elementary could have prepared her for. She is there on the strength of everything she always was, her mind and her work ethic, and the decades of intellectual hunger she developed in a town that had no use for it. She meets Hugh Parkfield through conflict, which is exactly how an episode about Lisa would construct a romantic beginning. The two of them reach for the same book in the library at the same moment. They argue over who had it first. They race through the text to determine who can process it faster. The competition between them is also, almost immediately, recognition. They are the same kind of person in a world full of people who are not that kind. They fall in love with the speed of two people who have spent years surrounded by others incapable of matching them. Hugh is British, voiced by Mandy Patinkin, and the episode constructs him carefully enough that his eventual failure is not a cartoon villain's failure, but a recognizable human one. He is intelligent and cultured and deeply fond of Lisa. He is also someone who has grown up in a context that gave him a clear picture of what his life was supposed to look like, and the Simpson family does not fit inside that picture. He visits Springfield and encounters Homer setting a British flag on fire by accident, Bart and Homer dragging him to Moe's Tavern, Homer presenting him with a set of pig-shaped cufflinks that have been in the Simpson family for a generation and that he is expected to wear at the wedding. Hugh endures all of this with the specific patience of someone who has decided to view it as temporary. The cufflinks become the episode's fulcrum. Hugh agrees to wear them at the ceremony. Then, on the morning of the wedding, Lisa discovers he has not worn them. She finds him and asks him to put them on. He agrees, on one condition: after the wedding, they will leave for England and they will not come back. The family will be, at best, a rare exception. He has decided, after the visit, that Lisa's genius is something he can love and her family is something he cannot accept. He is asking her to choose between the two as if they are separable. The show has spent 6 seasons establishing that they are not. Lisa's family is the condition of her intelligence, not despite which she is who she is, but within which. Her sharpness was developed in a household full of people who did not share it. Her ethics were formed in a family that rarely modeled them. Her resilience was built against the specific grain of growing up exactly where she grew up. The genius and the Simpsons are the same thing, and Hugh, for all his intelligence, has not understood this. Lisa gives back the ring. The wedding does not happen. The future version of her that the fortune teller was showing disappears back into the unwritten, and the episode returns to the present with a quiet devastation that it refuses to amplify into melodrama. The fortune teller tells Lisa that she does specialize in relationships that go wrong and that she will still have a true love, but not this one. Lisa walks out of the booth and finds Homer, who is enthusiastic about something entirely unrelated to anything that just happened inside the tent. She listens to him. The episode ends on that image. Lisa choosing the family, choosing Homer's specific kind of enthusiasm, choosing to be present in the ordinary life she belongs to, rather than the elevated one that requires her to leave it behind. Homer's speech to Lisa on the morning of the wedding before the cufflink confrontation is one of the finest pieces of dialogue the show produced for these two characters across the entire run. He tells her, in words that stumble and start again and ultimately arrive somewhere true, that he always felt she was the best thing his name ever got attached to, that since the day she learned to pin her own diapers, she had been smarter than him, that she was his greatest accomplishment and that she had done it all herself, that she had taught him to understand his own life better and had made him a better person. He trails off. She tells him gently that he is babbling. He smiles. That, he says, is what he means. She is still helping him. The episode won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 1995, becoming the third episode in the show's history to receive the honor. TV Guide placed it at the top of their list of the 12 best Simpsons episodes. A college newspaper called the Quindecim described leaving it off best of lists as the equivalent of leaving the Sistine Chapel off a list of Michelangelo's finest work, which was a comparison that perhaps overstated the case, but captured the feeling accurately. It was an episode that understood what the show had been building in Lisa Simpson and used the future as a mirror to show the present what it contained. 5 years years later, the show returned to the future and found something different there. Bart to the Future is the 17th episode of the 11th season, written by Dan Greaney and directed by Michael Marcantel, airing on March 19, 2000. The episode is not a Lisa episode in the same way that Lisa's Wedding is a Lisa episode. Its focus is Bart, who encounters a casino manager at a Native American casino and is shown a vision of his life 30 years forward in time. What he finds when he gets there is that he is a failing musician sharing a dwelling with Ralph Wiggum, and his sister is the President of the United States. The episode was not well received at the time. Entertainment Weekly called it the worst episode in the show's history, a description that the passage of time has not entirely rehabilitated, but has significantly complicated. The reviewers who dismissed it in 2000 were not wrong about its comic deficiencies, the jokes that did not land, the pacing that stretched certain sequences beyond their natural limits, the general sense that the episode was serving its premise rather than finding genuine feeling inside it. But they could not have known what the episode would eventually be taken to contain. Lisa, in the year 2030, is the first female president of the United States. She is the first one described in the episode's dialogue as straight, which was the show's way of distinguishing her from whatever hypothetical female presidents might exist in the intervening years without naming them. She has just been inaugurated. Her predecessor, whose administration has left the country in financial ruin, is named in a single line of dialogue that Lisa delivers without apparent irony. She tells her assembled staff that they have inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. Dan Greaney described the choice in a 2016 interview with The Hollywood Reporter. The thought of a Trump presidency, he said, just seemed like the logical last stop before hitting bottom. It was a joke about the nature of celebrity and money and the direction the show's writers believed American culture was moving. Trump had been running for the Reform Party presidential nomination in 1999 and 2000 when the episode was in production. He withdrew from that race before the episode aired. The joke was about a failed real estate developer becoming president because a culture obsessed with wealth had mistaken wealth for fitness. It was meant as a warning dressed as an absurdity. 16 years after the episode aired, Trump was elected president of the United States. The line about the budget crunch from President Trump circulated widely, attached to the narrative of the show's alleged predictive powers. Greaney did not take particular pleasure in being right. He had been making an argument about what American culture was capable of choosing, and hoping the argument would remain fictional. The parallel that attracted the most attention came in 2021, when Kamala Harris was inaugurated as Vice President of the United States on January 20th of that year. She wore a purple suit with a pearl necklace. The animated version of President Lisa Simpson in the year 2030 wears a purple suit with pearls on her inauguration day. The visual correspondence between the two outfits was striking enough that images comparing them circulated extensively across social media. Al Jean, who had been the show's showrunner since season 13, posted about the comparison himself, noting with evident satisfaction his pride in being part of the episode. Harris, running for president in 2024, would have been the successor to a Trump presidency in precisely the way the episode described Lisa as Trump's successor in 2030. The show had sketched a scenario in 2000 that real political history was appearing to trace, at least in outline. President Lisa in the episode is not a triumphant figure. She is a genius deployed against a catastrophe she did not create, trying to govern a country that her predecessor left in ruins, surrounded by advisors who are all familiar Springfieldian faces grown older. Milhouse is the Secretary of the Treasury. The world has hover buses running alongside regular buses. News is broadcast directly into people's brains through handheld devices. The imagery is recognizable Simpson's future world, comic, and slightly melancholy in the way that visions of the future in this show tended to be, more aware of what had been lost than excited about what had been gained. Lisa's genius, in this version of Springfield's future, has found its fullest expression in the most demanding possible arena. She is leading a nation through a fiscal crisis that requires the kind of sustained intelligence and ethical clarity she has been building her entire life. The episode does not celebrate this. It presents it as exhausting. She is right about everything and surrounded by a world that made a series of terrible decisions before she arrived. Being correct, the show keeps demonstrating across every version of Lisa's future is not the same as being relieved. It is the condition under which you are asked to clean up what correctness could not prevent. Back in the present, In a 7th season episode called Summer of 4 Feet 2 that aired in 1996 and sits between these two futures as a counterweight, the show found one of its most honest versions of what being Lisa Simpson in Springfield actually cost day to day. The episode is simple. The family goes to the beach for summer at Ned Flanders' beach house in a coastal town, and Lisa, having seen her yearbook and counted the signatures in it, understands that she has almost no friends. She decides to use the unfamiliar location as an opportunity to be someone else. She puts the books away. She wears different clothes. She lets the beach casual version of herself lead, rather than the Lisa who reads Jungian psychology in her spare time and corrects factual errors in people's conversations. She makes friends, real friends, the kind who want to see her again the next day. Bart, discovering what she has done, threatens to expose her. He follows through by showing her new friends her yearbook and explaining who she actually is. The friends look at the yearbook. They look at Lisa. They decorate the family's car with seashells and write Lisa rules across it. They like the Lisa in the yearbook. They were already liking the Lisa on the beach. They are, it turns out, the kind of people who can hold both versions without requiring her to choose. The episode is about the gap between who Lisa is and who she is afraid she has to be accepted. The gap closes, briefly and specifically, on one summer holiday with a small group of strangers who did not need the genius to be smaller to make room for themselves. The future episodes showed where her intelligence would eventually take her. This one showed the cost of carrying it every ordinary day in between. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Lisa's futures ranged from a wedding she had to refuse to a presidency she had to inherit, and in between, there was a summer at the beach where she finally found friends who could accept all of her at once. The woman who gave all these versions of Lisa her voice has spent nearly 4 decades in that recording booth, and what she has said about the character over those years is where the next part of this story goes. Section 9. The voice that nobody knows. Walking through a city after spending the morning in a recording booth voicing one of the most recognizable cartoon characters in the history of television, Yeardley Smith is not recognized. She has described this experience herself, and with evident affection. The hype around the show, she said in a 2009 interview with The Guardian, is something she gets to exist inside while remaining entirely invisible to it. People enjoy the show enormously. They know Lisa Simpson. They know the voice. They do not know the face, because the face is never connected to the voice in a way that registers in public. She walks through the crowd. Nobody stops her. She considers this wonderful. It is a particular kind of anonymity, specific to people whose most famous work is oral rather than visual. The rest of the main Simpsons cast share some version of it. Dan Castellaneta, who has played Homer for nearly 4 decades, is a working actor with a full face and a body and a life that exists in the physical world, but the Homer Simpson audiences carry in their heads is yellow and four-fingered and does not match the man. For Smith, the gap is even wider because Lisa's voice sits noticeably higher than Smith's speaking voice, which she raises slightly when recording. The performance is pitched up enough from her natural register that the two sounds, the cartoon and the person, do not immediately collapse into each other when strangers hear her talk. She moves through the world in a kind of protective parallel existence, famous and not famous simultaneously, which she has described across many years of interviews as among the best conditions an actor could ask for. She was born on July 3, 1964, in Paris, France, where her father worked as a correspondent for United Press International. Her father, Joseph Yeardley Smith, would go on to become the Washington Post's first official obituary editor, a role he held from 1977 to 1988. The family moved to Washington, D.C. when she was 2 years old, and she grew up there. By her own account, she was a shy and introverted child who found in performance a mode of expression that everyday conversation did not give her. She started acting professionally at 14, playing Tinkerbell in an unauthorized musical adaptation of Peter Pan at a local dinner theater outside the city. The role was not glamorous. She has described it as a beginning. She trained, moved through Washington's theater scene, and eventually landed at Arena Stage, one of the most respected regional theaters in the country, where she appeared in productions of Tom Stoppard's On the Razzle and Moliere's The Imaginary Invalid. She moved to New York and understudied the role of Debbie in Tom Stoppard's The Real Thing, a production directed by Mike Nichols and starring Jeremy Irons and Glenn Close. These were serious theatrical credentials at a serious level of the profession. She moved to Los Angeles in 1986 1986, took a recurring role in a television series, and began looking for the next thing. In 1986, she appeared in Maximum Overdrive, a Stephen King horror film directed by King himself, which did not advance her career in any particular direction, but gave her a film credit. The Simpsons audition came in 1987. She has told the story of it consistently across decades of interviews, and the details do not change. She came in wanting to read for Bart. Playing a bratty 10-year-old boy struck her as more interesting than playing the girl who might be, as she put it, the boring middle child. The casting director, Bonita Piatila, listened to 2 lines and thanked her. The voice was too high. It sounded like a girl. The part of Bart was not hers. But there was a sister. Would she be interested? She took the role without particular enthusiasm. Voice acting was, in the entertainment industry of the late 1980s, not considered equivalent to on-camera work. She has described how people who worked in voice acting were treated as being in a lesser tier of the profession, the animation booth, rather than the stage or the screen. She told herself that the job would not interfere with her on-camera career, which she expected to remain her primary focus. The logic was protective. She was not choosing voice acting as a vocation. She was accepting a side engagement that she assumed would remain secondary. She raised her pitch slightly, adjusted the sound, and became Lisa Simpson. The character's voice, as it existed in the Tracy Ullman shorts and through the first several seasons of the full show, was a collaboration between the quality of Smith's voice and the upward shift she applied to it. Al Jean, who would become the show's longest-serving showrunner, described the original casting decision as a happy fluke. He said that when she was cast in 1987, he simply liked the sound of her voice. He also said, with the benefit of hindsight, that she is a great actress, and that the show had been fortunate to find someone who could do what most cartoon voices did not require. Most cartoon work, he observed, wants things peppy and cartoony. Smith is capable of going through moments of great emotion and wringing everything out of them that they contain. That capacity was not apparent from a cold audition reading for a character who did not yet have an interior life. It became apparent over years. The moment that demonstrated it most clearly to everyone who was present for it was the recording of Lisa's substitute in 1991. Smith has talked about that session in multiple contexts across multiple years. The cast flew to New York to record with Dustin Hoffman, and James L. Brooks was in the room directing rather than the episode's credited director, Rich Moore. Smith described being starstruck and then, once the recording began, finding something that moved past the starstruck feeling into a different register entirely. The scene at the train station, in which Lisa tells Bergstrom she will be lost without him, and he tells her gently that he has to keep moving toward the students who need him most, required Smith to fully inhabit the grief of a child losing the most important adult relationship in her short life. She cried. She has said this plainly, without embarrassment. The recording booth is not a stage. No camera is pointed at her. The tears are not visible to the audience that will eventually watch the episode. But she does not know how to separate being at the microphone from being fully in the performance. She said, in an interview years later, "Why would you give less of your heart and soul just because nobody physically sees you?" The people in the room that day asked for more Kleenex. Smith joked about the quantity of mucus the session generated. The voice track that eventually aired, the one that made millions of viewers emotional about a cartoon child standing on a train platform, was produced by someone who was fully crying while recording it in a New York studio in early 1991. Working with Hoffman and Brooks that day changed how she understood the role. She has said the experience made her grow as an actress, which is a significant statement from someone who had already trained seriously in theater and who had appeared in demanding stage productions before she ever set foot in a recording booth. The emotional precision that Hoffman brought to the performance of Bergstrom, the way he inhabited the character's warmth and sadness and commitment, raised the standard of what the scene required from her. She met it. The scene landed. The episode is still discussed as one of the finest pieces of work the show produced in its early seasons. The Emmy arrived in 1992. Smith won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Voiceover Performance, which was the first year voice actors had been nominated in that category. She was the first person in the show's history to win one specifically for voicing Lisa. She has described her initial reaction to the award honestly. "There is a part of her," she said, "that felt it was not a real Emmy. The Creative Arts Emmy is presented at a separate ceremony from the main primetime telecast. In 1992, it was a juried award rather than one voted on by nominees, which gave it a different quality in her mind from the awards handed out on the main stage." She went to the televised Emmy ceremony the following week to present, and none of the press she encountered asked her what it had been like to win a voiceover award. The award went into a closet. It stayed there for 9 years. She has said, looking back, that this was a mistake. The Emmy was real. The work was real. The category it represented was real, even if the industry had not yet fully caught up with the idea that voice performance required the same gifts as any other kind. She eventually took it out of the closet. She put it on the mantle. She has given speeches at career events, encouraging other performers to celebrate the things that go into a closet, rather than letting them sit there accumulating dust, while the recipients wait for something they consider more legitimate to validate the years they have already put in. Matt Groening has described Smith across many years as being deeply similar to the character she voices. He has said that she holds strong moral views about what Lisa should and should not do. This is not a minor observation about a voice actor's relationship to their role. It means that Smith has, across nearly 4 decades, been a participant in the character's ethical life, rather than simply an instrument through which that life is expressed. When the character faces a decision that feels wrong to Smith, Smith will say so. The character's moral core has been protected partly by the person who gives it sound being unwilling to let the sound be attached to things the core would not permit. The cultural footprint that Lisa Simpson has left, and that Smith has been the voice of, is by any measure extraordinary for an animated character. TV Guide ranked Lisa 11th on their list of the top 50 greatest cartoon characters of all time. The ranking placed her in the same tier as Bart, tied, which is a judgment about the show's understanding that these two siblings are equally defining to what the series is, even if they generate that definition in opposite directions. People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals included her on their list of the most animal-friendly television characters. The Environmental Media Awards gave the show a special Board of Directors Ongoing Commitment Award in 2001, specifically for Lisa's role in episodes addressing environmental themes across years of broadcast. The United States Postal Service unveiled a series of 5 stamps on April 9, 2009, featuring Lisa and the 4 other members of the nuclear Simpson family. The stamps, designed by Groening himself, were 44 cents each. They were the first characters from a television series to receive this honor while the series was still actively in production. The Postal Service had recognized the family as something more than entertainment, a set of images embedded deeply enough in American culture to warrant permanent place in the country's official iconography alongside the presidents and the landmarks and the scenes of national life. The word meh, which Lisa uses in the show as a dismissive non-answer that communicates a specific shade of unimpressed ambivalence, was added to the Collins English Dictionary in 2008. A sound associated with a cartoon 8-year-old had passed sufficiently into the language that a major reference publication decided it was a real word used by real people and required a real definition. The New York Times published an article in 1996 reporting that Lisa Simpson was inspiring children, particularly young girls, to learn the saxophone. This was a measurable cultural effect. A fictional character was producing a change in the behavior of real children who watched her. Instrument teachers noticed it. Schools noticed it. The show had done something that entertainment rarely does with such specificity. It had made a particular skill aspirational for a population that had not previously had many models in that skill. Simon Singh, whose book on the mathematics hidden inside the show examined how the show had smuggled genuinely advanced mathematical concepts into primetime comedy across decades of episodes, identified Lisa as a critical ingredient in the show's mathematical sophistication. When he talks to school students about the mathematics in the show, he said, he always emphasizes Lisa because she is such a strong role model for girls who might be budding scientists or mathematicians. Al Jean has made similar observations. He has 2 daughters, he has said, and he could not be more of an advocate for girls entering and flourishing in the physical sciences. He described being proud that Lisa has become a symbol for people who share her intellectual values. Senator Ted Cruz described the Democratic Party at the 2018 Conservative Political Action Conference as the party of Lisa Simpson, as opposed to the Republican Party, which he associated with other members of the family. The framing was intended as a pejorative. The response from people who identified with Lisa Simpson was largely to confirm that yes, They were comfortable with the association. The cartoon 8-year-old had become a political category, a shorthand for a specific set of values and concerns that positioned themselves in relation to her in one direction or another. Few characters in the history of American animation have ever achieved that level of cultural functionality. Yeardley Smith has spent nearly 4 decades going to a recording booth, raising her pitch slightly, and giving voice to a child who has not aged a day since 1987. She has described the role, in its entirety and across all the years, as the best job she has ever had. She has said she has nothing but gratitude for the freedom the show has bought her in her life, the creative freedom, the financial freedom, the freedom to take the Emmy out of the closet and admit that it counts. She has said that if she had to be associated with one character in fiction, she would always be thrilled that it was Lisa Simpson. The feeling, by all evidence, is mutual. The character and the woman who voices her have grown together for the better part of 4 decades, each shaping the other in ways that neither could have predicted in 1987 when a casting director said the voice was too high for a boy and pointed toward a different door. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Yeardley Smith walked into an audition for a boy and left as the most recognizable genius in cartoon history. What all of it added up to, the saxophone and the sadness and the saxophone and the stamps and the Emmy in the closet, is something the final part of this video is built to answer. Section 10. What she proved. 8 years old, and she has been 8 years old for nearly 4 decades. The show operates on what television critics call a floating timeline, a structural choice in which characters occupy the year of broadcast without accumulating the years they have lived through. Lisa Simpson was 8 when the full series launched in December 1989. She was 8 when the show hit its creative peak in the early 1990s. She was 8 when Paul McCartney sat in a garden above a convenience store and helped her commit to something permanently. She was 8 when Homer pulled the crayon out of his skull and understood, briefly and completely, what her daily experience of the world felt like. She remains 8 now. She has been through more than most fictional characters accumulate across a lifetime of aging, and she has done all of it without adding a single day to the age she was when she started. This is strange, and the show has always known it is strange, and the strangeness has never fully resolved into something comfortable. A character who is always 8 and always the smartest person in most rooms she enters exists in a condition that real 8-year-olds do not. A frozen state of perpetual understanding without the release of growth. Real children who are extraordinary eventually become extraordinary adults. The process of becoming is available to them. Lisa Simpson cannot become. She can only be. And what she is, every time a new episode airs, is still 8 years old, still carrying the weight of knowing more than the town she lives in, still playing her saxophone in a household that loves her without quite being able to follow her. The paradox of her genius has always been built into her design in a way that neither the show's creators nor its writers have ever fully resolved, because resolution would require her to grow up and leave, and she cannot do either. What the best episodes of the series understood, and what the sections of this video have tried to trace through the specific moments that built her, is that the paradox is the point. Lisa Simpson is not a genius despite the loneliness and the grief and the frustration of living in Springfield. She is a genius through all of those things. The intelligence and the cost of carrying it have always been the same phenomenon observed from different angles. The show spent 35 years demonstrating this without ever stating it directly, which is one of the things that places it among the finest achievements in the history of the medium. What she proved, across the full arc of what the series built with her, was that a genius in a comedy does not have to be a punchline or a prop. The tradition of the smart character in American television comedy had, before The Simpsons, tended toward one of two approaches. The genius was either played for comedy as an eccentric whose intelligence made them socially inept and therefore funny, or the genius was a secondary character whose function was to explain things to the less intelligent protagonist so the audience could follow the plot. Neither approach treated intelligence as a condition with its own emotional weather. The Simpsons, in the episodes built around Lisa, treated it as exactly that. She is not funny because she is smart. She is not useful because she is smart. She is complicated because she is smart, and the complication is human in a way that the show pursued with remarkable consistency across the years that mattered most. most. The moment that established this most clearly came in the second season, in the episode that was difficult to make, and that producer James L. Brooks shaped more than any other person involved. The note that Mr. Bergstrom wrote her on the train platform said 4 words. It did not tell her what she would accomplish. It did not tell her what she would become. It told her what she already was. The genius was not a promise about the future. It was a fact about the present. The show knew this in 1991 and built everything that followed on the same understanding. The critical reception that accumulated around Lisa across the decades of the show's run reflects the difficulty of assessing a character who operates at the intersection of comedy and genuine pathos. TV Guide ranked her 11th on their list of the 50 greatest cartoon characters of all time, tied with Bart, which captures both how central she is to the show's identity and how impossible it is to place her above or below her brother without losing something true about what the show is. The ranking says that both of them are necessary. It does not say that one of them is more important, because neither claim would survive examination. The list of things that Lisa Simpson measurably changed in the real world is not long by the standards of global cultural forces, but it is real by the standards of a cartoon character. Real girls learned to play the saxophone because she played the saxophone, in numbers large enough that the New York Times reported on it as a phenomenon in 1996. Real environmental advocacy found a mainstream platform because the show tied it to her character across years of broadcast and won awards from organizations that measured genuine environmental impact. The United States Postal Service put her on a stamp. A word she used dismissively became a word real people use and that a major English dictionary eventually defined. A political figure used her as shorthand for an entire ideological position, which required a cartoon 8-year-old to have accumulated enough specific identity that she could function as political shorthand at all. These things do not happen to characters who are merely clever. They happen to characters who have been drawn with enough specificity and enough interior life that audiences find in them something true about their own experience and carry that truth forward into the world. The people who grew up watching Lisa Simpson and found in her something that reflected their own experience of being smart in places that did not know what to do with them have always been specific about what they found. Not a fantasy of effortless genius, not a reassurance that intelligence guarantees reward. A portrait of what it actually costs, day by day, to see clearly in a place full of people who have chosen not to, and to keep going anyway. The show went through a long middle period in which the characters' complexities were flattened in ways that long-term fans found frustrating. The balance between her intelligence as a quality she possessed and her intelligence as a thing she performed for approval tilted in the wrong direction for many seasons. The self-righteousness that had always been part of her character as a realistic flaw became, for a stretch, the primary note the character played. The nuance of the early seasons, in which Lisa was right about things and still aware of her own limitations, gave way to a version of the character who was right about things and increasingly unaware that being right and being good company were not the same quality. The show recognized this eventually. From the 31st season, the character was consciously recalibrated toward the version of herself that had made her matter in the first place. What survived even the difficult middle years was the saxophone and what the saxophone represented. Smith has said across many interviews that the saxophone is the place where the character's intelligence and the character's emotional life meet. When Lisa plays, she is not demonstrating cleverness, she is demonstrating the only kind of expression that is large enough to hold everything she carries. The music is the genius made audible in its fullest form, without the friction of trying to explain something to people who do not have the vocabulary, without the loneliness of knowing things no one around her can confirm. The saxophone is how Lisa Simpson talks to the parts of the world that can hear her. It has been in the character since the first season. It will still be there whenever the show eventually ends. The Hollywood Walk of Fame star was awarded to the Simpson family in 2000 at 1721 Hollywood Boulevard. They are among the very few fictional characters to receive the honor, which is typically reserved for human performers and the occasional studio. The star belongs to the family collectively, but it is hard to look at it without thinking about the character who most consistently carried the show's ambitions beyond what the comedy format alone could reach. Homer is the show's comic engine. Bart is its its anarchic spirit. Marge is its heart. Lisa is its conscience and its grief, and its most sustained argument about what it costs to take the world seriously in a place that has decided not to. When people who were children in the 1990s and early 2000s describe what Lisa Simpson meant to them, a pattern emerges across the accounts. The specific detail that recurs is not a particular episode or a specific joke. It is the recognition that the show was acknowledging something real. That being the smartest kid in a class that does not value intelligence is a specific experience with a specific texture, that the loneliness of it is real, and the frustration of it is real, and the saxophone playing at the edge of a bridge in the Springfield night is, in some essential way, the truest image of what that experience feels like from the inside. The show did not give this experience a happy ending. It did not suggest that the loneliness resolves, or that the right people always arrive in time, or that being right eventually becomes the same thing as being heard. It just kept showing the experience, season after season, with the honesty it had developed in those early years, when James L. Brooks was pushing the writers to try something genuinely emotional, and they were not sure it would work. Lisa Simpson appears in every episode of The Simpsons except one, a single installment in which her absence is notable precisely because it is so rare. She has been in the opening title sequence from the very beginning, playing her saxophone through the hallway of Springfield Elementary while the camera pulls back out into the street and the family converges on the couch. She has been playing that sequence of notes since 1989. The show has changed the sequence over the years, updated it for high-definition broadcast, adjusted the details to reflect the current era's technology and cultural references, but Lisa is still there in the hallway, still playing something that sounds like it comes from somewhere real, still 8 years old, and still the only person in the building who seems to understand what the music is for. She is not the character that the audience was supposed to love when the show began. Bart was the phenomenon of the early years, the one on the merchandise and the lunchboxes and the t-shirts, the one that concerned school administrators and delighted children. Lisa was the other one, the complicated one, the one who would take years to find her full shape. The show gave her those years. It built her across them with care, and with the occasional disaster, and with the specific kind of commitment that only happens when the people doing the building understand what they have. By the time the building was finished, what they had was one of the finest fictional characters in the history of American television, who happened to be 8 years old, who happened to be yellow, who happened to play a saxophone too large for her body with a precision that the story of who she is fully explains. The genius was there from the beginning, waiting to be found. The show found it one quiet evening in the first season, when a girl who could not explain why she was sad walked out of her house alone and followed the sound of music through Springfield until she arrived at a bridge where a man with a saxophone was turning his own sadness into something beautiful. She listened. She played alongside him. The music they made together in the dark was the first full statement of what the character was going to be. Everything else, the Mensa card and the vegetarianism and the presidential future and the crayon letter on the kitchen counter and the note from the train platform and the album played on the radio through a storm, was the answer to the question that music raised. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.